Welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is a part of SciSec's weekly series titled Samga Chatvam. May we all progress together. The objective is to cover cybersecurity topics and provide conceptual overview. Let us start by going through some ground rules first. To keep their mics on mute. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. In case you have any questions, please share it on the chat window and the speakers will respond to it after the webinar. We will be recording this webinar and the recording will be uploaded on our SciSec's YouTube channel, so you can revisit it later. Karthik, we may move to the next slide, please. This is the 22nd webinar and the topic today is Network Security Architecture for Data Centers. In the next slide, we have the upcoming webinar, which is scheduled for next week on the topic data privacy and social media. This is a list of all the upcoming webinars which we have planned for you. So do stay tuned. We will be sharing all required details on our social media accounts, including LinkedIn and Twitter. We are very happy to announce that we are now on Twitter. You can follow us on our Twitter handle for more updates @SciSecCoE. Make sure you follow us there and we'll keep you updated about all our webinars and all upcoming opportunities in the field of cybersecurity. As usual, there will be an assessment after this webinar, which will be kept open for 60 minutes. The questions will be from topics which are already covered in this webinar. Those of you who get more than 11 or more than 11 marks out of 15 will be provided with a certificate of achievement. Those who are unable to take this assessment will be provided with a certificate of participation. At the end of the assessment, you will also be asked to provide feedback. Please provide your genuine feedback and be assured that it will have no bearing on your assessment whatsoever. We request all of you to please provide your details very clearly while taking the assessment, as a certificate is generated basis these details. We will be sharing the link of the assessment in the Q&A section after the webinar. Please note, this assessment is open only to those who have participated in this webinar. Let me now take this opportunity to introduce the speaker for today's webinar on the topic Network Security Architecture for Data Centers. We are having with us today Mr. Pramod Kumar Potharaju, who is the Associate Director of Cyber Risk Service Practice. He comes with around 14 years of rich experience in different information security domains and has worked with prominent multinational organizations. He has extensive experience in secure design, architecture, threat management, intelligence services, enterprise risk management, audit services, and data security. Thank you for joining us, Pramod. Now over to you so that you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Shika, for the welcome note. Shika, if I may ask, do we know who are the audience so that my presentation would be, would be very clearly understandable to myself what to talk, what to present, basically. If I know my audience well, probably I'll design my presentation in that way. Even though I've come up with the material, but no, but still, I just wanted to know if it is known to us, then it would be good. Otherwise, we anyways going to start. It's fine.
Right. So Pramod, ideally we see a mix of audience. 60 to 70% of our audience constitutes of students who have technological backgrounds. We also see participation from faculty and working professionals. So it's a mixed audience, but primarily we have students with technological background. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Thanks. With that, Shika, I was also told that majority of them would be students, right? So I try to cover the basic things, right, rather going into deeper concepts, because network security is such a huge domain. Even if you wanted to cover at least 10% of the whole thing, it won't be possible to complete in 1.5 hours of time, right? So keeping that in mind, I just created a very plain PPT, a very practical and very plain PPT, right? Because in their academics, you might be learning the definitions and things like that. But in these sessions, I'll try to put up a very practical scenario so that you will understand the concepts little pragmatic way. Yeah.
Yeah, that
So
will be great.
being
Thank you.
Yeah, Shira. So being a consultant, right? We are Deloitte, being a consultant and having worked with multiple organizations, we always end up, preparing a jazzy presentations, very impacting and very, colorful one, right? But here today, I purposefully kept something is very plain, so that I always believe that the plainer the presentations, the easy it would be for everybody to understand, right? That's what I believe. So uh, let's get started with this. So before I put up my desktop for a presentation, I wanted to take you through a, I wanted to emulate, right? I wanted to give you a scenario where why this network security is so important in our day-to-day life for any organization, for any of our day-to-day life, right? If you look at it, say for example, you're getting into a mall, right? What you get to see these days, right? The mall has a gate, then you have a bag frisking, scanners in place. Then you would have a security guard checking, checking you, through their scanners, right? So the three levels of checking happening even for a mall, right? Which has not so much of valuable data or assets, right? They would have assets which are important for their own business. However, there would not be any customer data or anything that is very digital in it, right? So when it comes to a physical security side, right, physically protecting ourselves, physically protecting their, uh, the malls and shops and etc. Right? They do check the bags and the belongings what we bring, right? They even check our pockets and all. Such deep level scanning they are doing in order to detect a threat, right? Same thing goes in the same. The analogy is the same thing when it comes to organizations, right? Organizations process the data, collects the data, stores the data, and so on and so forth, right? The same analogy applies here also. However, the gates, the security guards, the scanners, etc., are through a different security solutions, right? The same process. There we do with the physical human beings, belongings, bags, and etc. Here it is more to do with the digital part of it in a network. I'm sure you might be knowing what is network is about, right? The network is just it's a uh, uh, components which ensures the connectivity among the different computer systems or servers and any other IT components. All this put together will work together makes a network. It's a connecting, it's a connecting components, right? Same goes with the architecture, right? The architecture is nothing but all these components working together in tandem is called architecture, right? So we are going to talk about network security architecture. So network and security solutions putting together, working in tandem is called network security architecture, right? So with this, I'm going to share my screen, uh, and we are going to discuss about why what are the important things needs to be considered. Please let me know if you see my screen. Can somebody?
Yes, yes, it is visible.
Right. So, so people. So what is that network security? Involves, as I said, right? Network security involves all activities that organizations, enterprises, and institutions undertake to protect the value and ongoing usability of assets with respect to integrity and continuity of the operations, right? Just go back to the same analogy I mentioned, right? The security guards, the gates, and the frisking machines and the scanners and all those are used for what? The protecting their assets, the shops, in the shops in the malls assets, right? The same analogy applies here when it comes to organizations, enterprises, and institutions, right? What they are protecting. They're protecting the assets with respect to the data confidentiality, integrity, and continuity of it, right? So what is an asset, right? In a tangible way, we know what are the assets, but what is an asset when it comes to an organization? Asset is nothing but anything that has a value to an organization. It could be a computer, it could be a data, or it could be a any document or anything of that sort, right? So we're not going to touch upon the physical, tangible, assets here. We are going to talk more with respect to the digital data, the data, right? The data and information which is processed by the computer systems, right? That is what the network security solutions are helping an organization to protect their information and data which is stored in the databases, processed by applications, and etc, right? So what an organization to start with, right? What I have to do? How do I know which are the network security solutions I need to deploy, right? Which are the network security controls one organization has to deploy? We need to think, we always have to think about one thing. What are the possible threats to my organization, right? That's a fundamental thing to start with. What are the different kind of threats which would possibly attack on their given assets and organization profile, right? That's a fundamental thing to know. So an effective network security strategy requires identifying the threats and then choosing them the most effective set tools to combat them, right? If I know the threat, I would be knowing what controls I need to put in. Say, for example, let's take your real life analogical example, right? If there's a thief, that's a threat, you apply the lock, right? So that's the control you are going to put. The same thing, before we get into our choosing a network security solution or network security architecture for that matter, we need to understand what are the possible threats. Accordingly, we deploy a control. We don't deploy a control, which are not very viable to an organization. I'll tell you, once we go through what are the different kind of threats and their applicability with respect to what components and all, right? The threats always, remember this point, the threat always depends upon the technology and the organization profiles, right? The threats are different to banks, threats are different to your manufacturing industry, threats are different to some other line of business, right? That's one thing. Let's go to the next slide, where, as I said, that we need to primarily to understand what are the threats to your network, right? We might have all heard about this viruses, ransomware, DDoS, SynFlood. Probably you might have not heard. I'll tell you that. Malwares and network-based attacks and application-based attacks, right? There are multiple such threats with respect to the networks and applications and data and etc. Right? So, end of the day, what is the goal of a threat, right? The goal of a threat to cause a breach in the organization. The breach could be of taking the data out of your or your organization, or causing some fraudulent activity so that you get a monetary benefit, or it could be to cause a regulatory compliance risk to you, or it could be for your reputation things also, right? The target of all these threats is to cause some damage which could result into any of the risk as such as it could be a regulatory requirement, it could be your data theft. Say, for example, I steal your credit card data information and I'll use elsewhere, or it could cause a reputation loss that these days most of the attacks are coming as state sponsored attacks, right? Somebody would sponsor, some country or some state would sponsor the attackers to cause a damage, right? Damage to our government policies, and so that our economy will go down, and there could be a lot of motivations around it, right? Very recent one, history. Thankfully there was no, sorry, Aragesri, thankfully there was no data loss as such, right? But that's more to do with the reputation of our government sponsored applications, right? So the motivation could be anything. So in order to combat all these threats and their associated risk, right, we need to start developing a prototype. We need to start develop an architecture so that our assets and the data assets and everything else will remain secure, right? Next, I'm not sure, right? This is a very plain one segment. It's a very plain one segment of network security architecture defense. But I'll come to this in the last. I'm just showing you different components up to a application, web application itself, right? There are more other components comes in when we cross the application and access the interior parts of your network. Okay. Sure, you might have heard about the DOS and firewalls and the IPS, WAF or web application firewall, advanced persistent threat, anti-advanced persistent threat solutions, etc. Right? So, as I said, the network architecture is nothing but this security. Network security architecture is nothing but all these components are working together, right, to provide the essential security to the resources, to the data, to the resources, and to the assets. Okay, so that is what that is what the objective of having a network security architecture. So people, you need to understand the functionality. Somebody saying sorry, used to full screen. Yeah, I put it in a presentation. So people, in your academics, you might have understand the definition of what is a firewall and IPS, WAF, and etc. Right? If not, I'll tell you right now. Right? As we discussed in the beginning, I started with the analogy of a mall, right? The gate we talked about first comes is what? The gate, right? The gate in an organization, of course, organization will have a physical date, but as I say that we are not talking about a physical threats. We're talking about a very logical threats which deals with the digital data and digital environments, right? So here, technically, logically, the gate is nothing but your firewall, right? So before I allow somebody, right, I should be knowing who am I allowing, right? But see, I cannot allow everybody. Hence, I'm putting a gate. I'm building a wall and I'm putting a gate so that at least in the outer layer, before somebody gets in, I have a protection in place. I have a gate in place. Somebody has to open the gate, then only they'll be able to enter, right? The same thing applies here in an organization. You need to have a gate which looks into who's coming and who's going out, right? Who can be allowed, rather, not looking into who can be allowed, who cannot be allowed, right? So I put a lock into a door, right? Whomsoever has a key can allow inside, whomsoever doesn't have a key cannot come inside, right? The same analogy applies here. The firewall, in the firewall, I will write a rule. Say, for example, Pramod and Shikha, right? And Akshay, right? These three people I wanted to allow. Pramod I wanted to allow, Shikha I don't want to allow, say for example, right? I need to ensure that my logical components needs to understand that he is Pramod and she is Shikha. I can allow Pramod, I cannot allow Shikha, right? These are what? These are rules which I am defining on my gateway, right? These are the rules. Technically, I will write a rule that Pramod is allowed, Shika is not allowed. How does a firewall will understand who is Shika, who is Pramod, right? Because we are physical human beings, and people can recognize us. But in logical way, how does a network component or network security component would identify anybody who's trying to get inside the network and who's trying to go outside the network, right? That is through their IP addresses, right? So every logical entity who's trying to communicate with the organization resources would have IP address with associated with it, right? That is how a firewall will understand, whom's to be allowed, whom's to be not allowed, disallowed, right? So firewall is nothing but a logical device which is controlling the access into your network in incoming and outgoing, right? So that is the basic functionality of firewall. Organizations deploy firewall to ensure that only the authorized resources will be authorized people or authorized resources, authorized organizations can only be able to access inside. I'll start with the basic definition of firewall that way. Having said that, firewall would have a multiple other thousand options, okay, which will protect a necessary, which will give a necessary protection profiles or settings, right? To combat a different kind of threats. We'll discuss about later, right? We'll discuss about that firewall entire functionality later in a different probably a different session, because in this session I just wanted to focus more on the fundamentals of letting you to know what are these logical devices, right, compared to our day-to-day analogical things. Okay, so I talked about rules defining on a firewall, right? How does a rule really look, right? If you go inside, if you say for example, if you access a firewall, how does a rule really look like? Yeah, I'll just show you with one example how does a rule look like. Okay, some people call this as a technical policy, technical rule, or some people call it as access control list. Okay, so don't get confused when you go through all these jargons, okay? Because these are nothing but the same. Okay. So in a firewall, basically I discussed about whom to allow, whom to not allow, whom to deny, right? It looks like this. In a firewall, if say for example, this is a firewall console, all you have to write is you need to choose the source field. There's a source address, there is a destination address, and there is a protocol, right? Some applications would have protocol that you need to choose either TCP or UDP, right? ICMP or GRE, whatever that protocol you're going to use, and the port, the destination port, right? These are there are a lot of other fields, right? Part of this rule, but let's not discuss about it. It's a very lengthy thing to discuss at this moment. For you to make you understand how practically firewall works is this: you need to write a rule or technical rule within this firewall, right? Where you mention four important things. You write four important things, in the configuration of the firewalls. That is source address. Source is promotes IP. Destination is, say, for example, www.google.com, say, for example, right? Destination address is that. Protocol is which protocol you are going to allow, TCP, UDP, or you know ICMP, and etc. And the port, which is the port the application is running on, right? Those are the simple syntactical rule you have to write. It's a very simple. Some firewalls works on command line, right? I need to write the commands, or some firewalls have a GUI, right? You get to see all these options. You just have to fill in. It's like a form you need to fill in. The form contains source address 10.1.2.3. Destination address is 10.5.6.7, say for example. Protocol is TCP. My port destination is 443, right? So these are the simple, these are very simple definition of rules. The syntax of rule, the format of rule, right? You call it as anything. This is how inside a firewall looks to allow or disallow. So fundamentally, we need to define such kind of rules to ensure the access is actually controlled, right? You're permitting, you're denying on a very controlled way, right? So that is what a fundamentally a firewall does. I'll get into details of firewall. There are different options like anti-spoofing. There are different options of blocking a SYN flood, or there are different types of attacks. But for you, just to start with, fundamentally, to understand, this is how a firewall needs to be configured. This is a far most important thing. Many organizations are actually getting hacked, or they are undergoing through different kind of attacks because they don't define the firewall rules as it's supposed to be, right? These are very, very sensitive matter, very, very important issue for any organization to configure the firewall in a right manner, right? There should not be any open-ended rules. When I say open-ended rules, you need to really determine what is the source address. You absolutely have to know, right? What is the source address? What is the destination I'm going to allow? And what is the port I'm going to allow, right? So very, very important matters, right? Say, for example, when I say open-ended, right, there could be any, right? For example, there could be any. Google.com, how do you identify somebody who's going to access this? How do you determine a specific IP address? You can't do that, right? Because anybody in the world can access such kind of web applications. right? It could be your own website, in the Data Center of Excellence, government.com, say for example, I'm just giving an analogy, right? It could be anybody. You're not restricting somebody to access this website, right? So those cases where you carefully allow that, right? Source could be
She
any.
is having only one data card, other data card.
Sorry, somebody asked the question.
Requesting
Okay.
participants to please mute themselves. Abbas, can you
No, fine, Shiva. So as I mentioned, that is a very critical area where you need to, very diligently mention the rules, right? I was talking about open-ended rules. Mentioned that there could be some situations where sources could be any, but destination needs to be carefully chosen, right? When you write any, right, you're allowing anybody to access your resources. Okay, that's a place where you need to diligently allow which are absolutely required to be accessed by any source, right? So those kind of other diligent activities you need to do when you define the firewall rules, right? Destination cannot be any. For example, source can be any, but in general, we cannot see a purpose to have a destination is any. That means, right? You allow some source promote, right? And destination is any. Okay, you allow promote to get into one shop or one room, right? You cannot allow promote to get elsewhere, right? That is how you need to really deep down, in a granular way, you need to restrict, the resources which you are allow. Of course, you allowed promote inside doesn't mean that promote need to access anything that he wish to, right? So ensure that we need to understand that the firewall needs to be configured in such granular way. Yes, of course, Pramod is authorized person, but he cannot access anything else except for one particular portion or some area you allotted him to move around, right? You allotted him to access. That's how that granular level you need to look into it. As I mentioned, that many organizations have not really designed their firewalls well. Hence, there's so many hacking activities happens, right? This is the foremost thing to understand, people. Okay. Most importantly, by default, you need to deny everybody, right? Say, for example, you are a new organization, you don't know who are the people who are going to access, right? The first and foremost thing you need to ensure that by default everybody is denied. What happens is that why it is so important, because since you have defined certain rules, say for example you allowed five IP addresses to connect to your network, right? And if you leave that way, if you leave that sorry, if you leave that at that level, right, uh, you are not fulfilling the complete restrictions, right? You need to by default, you need to define a deny all. You deny all except for those 5 or 6 people you allowed them to access the resources. Okay, that is most important. So every firewall by default, it has an intrinsic rule that comes with deny all. By default, I deny everybody except for the people who I allowed explicitly through the rule base I define, right? So that's how firewall works, right? So whenever in a future when you work for corporates or your clients, you ensure that the firewall is configured very secure way, which has not open-ended rules, very determined IPs are mentioned in the technical policies, and it contains the deny all rule. So at least to start with, fundamentally, you need to learn these two things and try to implement, right? That is the foremost important thing. It is not only source address and destination address, it is also to with the port. Say, for example, your application is running on a 443 port, right? HTTPS, we generally see that, right? HTTPS is 443. You write that thing is also here. Source address, destination address, and port is 443, right? So you cannot have an open-ended rule on the ports also. You're not supposed to have it. The ports also needs to be very restricted way which the application is listening to. You cannot open any other ports, right? You're opening another port. That means the port is nothing but a room through through which you are communicating, right? So you are restricting me to only one room to a specific area, right? So that kind of granular level of implementation one has to go through. That is fundamentally to do with the access control list or technical policy in the firewall. If you look at the schematic representation, what a firewall does is egress and ingress filtering, right? Anybody coming from inside will go through this firewall. The firewall will decide whether to allow this person or not. How it decides, it looks up to this rules. Source, yes, Pramod is coming. Destination, Pramod wanted to reach up to here. Is it allowed? Technically allowed here. Do I see any rule? Yes, then I will be reaching up to here, right? So that is the basic functionality of the firewall, and that's how it takes the decision on the things. I'll go to I'll go to the primary this one, right? So we discussed about firewall. We know how firewall works, at least fundamentally. Now what happens is we talked about after the gate, right? After the mall gate, we have seen security guard or a scanner machine, right? The scanner machine is scanning through all the bags. They understand, right? The gatekeeper understood that it is Pramod whom I have to allow. I looked at the register. I say that okay, Pramod can be allowed into this mall. That is the security guard and the gate. That is together is firewall. They decided to allow me. Now what happens? Pramod is allowed, of course, but Pramod needs to be checked. What is he coming with? Is he getting a bomb along with him, right? Is he getting a gun along with him? Is he getting something very objectionable material, right, which would cause some threat to this mall, right? That needs to be checked. They are doing that, right? The malls are doing that, right? This is our day-to-day example I'm giving, right? Mapped to our logical things in an organization. So the bags needs to be checked. What Pramod is bringing needs to be checked very thoroughly, right? Hence, I'll put through this through a scanner. Scanner will read through the objects inside the material which I brought, and if it found very objectionable, if it found threatful, they will block us, right? They will not allow us to enter inside, right? Or they will call the police, right? So that's the difference between IPS and IDS. I'll come to the difference. I'm sure you might be knowing that. The name itself indicates that intrusion prevention system, intrusion detection system, right? So they're blocking me that I come with an objectionable material, right? The same thing goes with IPS. Firewall allowed an IP address that this person can get inside, right? However, he's authorized to get inside, but I need to check him every time he comes in, right? In a logical way, I'm sure you might have understand about the TCP/IP packets, right? So every connection will come with. I mean, it's about TCP/IP packets, right? It's about packet data, right? So once somebody is allowed, right, he needs to be examined. That means the data which he's trying to transfer, the communication is trying to establish through the data packets needs to be looked for any suspiciousness. I am fine. I am an authorized person with a malicious intention to cause some damage to my organization, right? So there, what happens? I know that I am authorized person, but I wanted to do some malicious activity, right? It might be I'm trying to put a malware inside. It might be I'm trying to I'm trying to execute some script in a system which I am allowed to do it, right? I'm allowed to access a application, but I'm not allowed to put a script inside to it, right? So these kind of basic examination about the malice, about the malicious content, about the content, right? About the packets which are initiated by me will be examined through intrusion prevention systems, right? Or detection systems. They will examine and ensure that despite of being an authorized user, I'm not I'm not allowed to I'm not allowed to go further, right? How does it do it, right? Remember, every solution we are going to talk in general in network security are worked with certain rules. They needs to be taught about certain rules. They need to understand. They need to be enabled with some intelligence that they will take some decision about it, right? So these devices inline, right? These are inline devices. Before I reach destination, the source is internet, the destination is something which is web server I am trying to access, right? So these inline devices will be given some intelligent information, right? Some configuration, some technical policies which enables them to take a decision whether am I allowed to go there? If I'm allowed, am I going to am I a very clean packet, right? So IPS looks at the packet, examines it, and blocks it. How does it? How it does is there are again technical policies within it, right? The policy contains signatures. We call it as signatures, right? So IPS contains the signatures, which are nothing but are logical algorithms, right? So every packet, even if I say talk about any attack, any malicious packet would have certain pattern with it, right? It comes with some pattern, right? It comes with, say for example, ABCDF, right? If any packet comes with ABCDF, it has some malicious string in it. I'm just giving a layman example, right? ABCDF, IPS will understand I am programmed to look at ABCDF, and if I found so, I need to block it because it is a malicious packet. In nature, it has some script, it has something, it can execute wrong things in my network, right? So that's how IPS works on. It contains a detailed signatures. What it does, it takes the packet, looks at the packet, and understand if it is matching with the existing signature which I have. If it is matches, then it will block it then and there, right? So it doesn't know anything else. It doesn't understand whether this person can be allowed or not. It won't take any access control related decisions, right? This IPS is not looking at easy, easy allowed, easy authorized to move further or not. It doesn't take any kind of such decision, right? It only looks at, I don't know who is he. He come to my point. I will look at it. If he's clean or not. If he's not clean, he'll be blocked then and there. How it does? It looks at the signature, pre-programmed signatures within it, and it matches, compares. If it matches, it blocks it. If it doesn't matches, uh, it will further allow, right? Just take a step back and let's go back to the same example I've given, right? The scanner found there is some malicious, there is a bomb in it, right? I've taken a bomb into the mall. The scanner found that there is a bomb inside the bag, right? So what happens? I will be quarantined. I'll be taken into the custody. I'll be calling the police. The security guard, the authorities will be calling to the police, right? That means what? I am alerting it, right? I am alerting somebody so that they come and take the necessary action on me, right? On a malicious intended person, right? So what IPS does, IPS simply blocked everything, right? I cannot go further. That's it. Over matter, you go home, right? IDS does is they call police, right? It creates an alarm, right? It allows the person to move in. It creates an alarm that I saw somebody going with a suspected behavior. I've seen the signature is matching, but there's somebody who's going with the bomb inside. Please come and get hold of him, right? That's what IDS does. It creates an alert and gives to the policeman. I mean, in an organization, policeman, nothing but a security people, information security people. They will get an alert that so and so attack probably could be possible within my network, and then they take the necessary actions against those kind of things, right? That is nothing but IPS or IDS. That's how logically IPS and IDS works. It simply contains the information about the signatures. It examines the packet, looks at the pattern. If it matches, it matches. If it doesn't match, then it will be blocked, or there would be an alert sent to the information security people. Now let's look at some other concepts of IPS. Uh, you know, the deployment. You need to understand. Okay, let's talk about what are the types of intrusion detection and prevention system, right? So one is at a network level, the other is a host level. There are two kinds of things basically, right? One you deploy at network level. This is a network level. You deploy it at network level, or you deploy at a host level. There's a web server I just mentioned here. On a host level, you can deploy one IPS. Either you detect here, or once it comes to the system, I can detect here also, right? If I don't place due to some reason, you're not placing an appliance at a network level, you're not placing it at a network level after the gateway itself, right? I can still go down to the host level and examine the packet before it writes into the system memory, right? Before it gets executed, keep examining the packets at a host level also. That can also be possible. Okay. So always remember two important things when it comes to IPS deployment or IPS or IDS deployment, right? Since I am blocking, what IPS is doing, IPS is blocking the entire traffic, right? It necessarily have to be inline mode. What we call it as a inline mode, right? It should come in line. The security guard, after the security guard, after the scanner, the security guard should be there, right? Just to ensure that am I necessarily going through the scanning machine or not, right? So the same way, after the firewall, it should be the next. It should be in line. It should not stand elsewhere. It should stand in line with in line with the traffic flow, right? After firewall, it should necessarily have to go through the IPS. It happens only when you configure that IPS to be inline mode, right? So I think you know how switches, network switches, and all things works, right? So these all systems are hooked up to one network switch, right? The network switch here, say for example, the firewall is connected to one network switch. There's another box. Just imagine, right? On the same switch, the IPS will be connected to, right? So what happens is when IPS sends the data, further to the destination, the same switch from where the port on the port where the traffic is going through, IPS listen to the traffic on that port, right? On a physical, on the logical port of that, switch, and examines. That's how you need to do. That is called inline mode. There is another mode is called promiscuous mode or a passive mode, right? So what happens is on a switch, as I said, right, on a switch where firewall and these devices are connected, what happens is some people, do not place in inline mode. They place it in a promiscuous mode. What does it mean is it's nothing but copy paste of a traffic. I don't want to look because due to some performance reasons or because of some latency which they wanted to avoid, right? They do not want their devices to look at the traffic very active way. They wanted organizations wanted to examine the traffic in a passive way. What does it mean is if I do actively monitoring the traffic, there could cause some delay. Say for example, there are certain time sensitive organizations. Say for example, stock exchange, stockbrokers, and all, right? In a seconds of time, the values varies, right? In that kind of situations, if I apply very stringent security controls, like IPS will listen to it and examine it, and then further only it will allow me to go through the destination, right? In such time sensitive applications may not afford. Nowadays everybody's doing, of course, but sometimes they may not afford to have a solutions looking at their data very and actively and ensuring that the malicious packets are blocked, right? So that could cause some time delay. Hence, right, some people put it in a passive mode. They really wanted to understand if this packet is malicious or not. If it's malicious, then they will act upon it in a reactive way, not a proactive way. IPS is a proactive way of dealing with the malicious packets. IDS is not proactive. It is a reactive way of dealing it, right? So IDS will look at a mirror of that traffic, right? It doesn't look at the actual traffic, but it will look at the mirror of the traffic. So what happens is we create a port mirroring. Port mirroring is nothing but, as I said, that the firewall and IPS all is connected to one switch. the switch port copy and paste that same data in a different port, right? It copies and put the same data on a different port where IDS is listening to. It looks at that traffic and says that yes, I see this ABCDEFGH, which is matching with my signature. I'm going to alert to the security team that hey, some traffic is already allowed inside. They found to be suspicious. Then those security team will take the necessary action to terminate the connectivity or to block the traffic coming back to firewall and doing so on and so forth, right? So that is the deployment. Understand, when an organization wants to implement IPS or IDS, it depends upon their deployment, right? The deployment can be inline mode or a promise case mode, right? Is somebody running IDS, somebody running IDPS solution, putting an inline mode and calling it as putting it in a promise case mode, calling it as an IPS? That's not the right way of looking at in a threat detection, right? Just another important thing needs to remember when it comes to IPS configuration, right? As I mentioned, these devices would have certain rules or technical policies, certain signatures, right? They are programmed to detect based on certain data which is fed into it. The data are nothing but its signatures, as I mentioned. This signature needs to be enabled. All these signatures, after every signature, in general, you would see after every signature, before the signature, you will see a checkbox, right? You need to check that. You need to enable it, right? By default, not all signatures are enabled. You need to configure it manually to enable it. Configuration is nothing much, when I say configure the signature, it means that you know to enable the signatures, right? There are a lot of profiling happens, there grouping happens, which you can learn this later because you'll get confused with that, right? The IPS needs to have all the signature. It comes by default with the signatures. This needs to be enabled manually so that it is empowered. Unless you enable the signatures, IPS will not be in a position to detect anything because it is a dead device, right? You need to enable IPS to understand the traffic by just ensuring that you enable all the necessary signatures, right? The signatures are categorized into multiple things, right? I say multiple things from the risk perspective, right? Could be critical risk, critical signatures, high, medium, low, informational, etc., etc. Right? Different OEMs follows in different way. Okay, so at least at least we should ensure that these critical signatures, right? The critical signature needs to be enabled upfront. Okay, there could be a medium, high, critical, and high. Generally, we generally recommend our clients that we should upfront enable it without taking any chance. Okay, the reason why organizations, we have seen people why they are afraid to enable the signatures because sometimes the traffic may not be malicious but it still get blocked. Okay, IPS would understand to certain degree. There is an accuracy of IPS detection to a certain degree of extent, but some financial organizations, banks and all, because it deals with money and it deals with monetary values, uh, right? There, some people may not take very risky decisions to enable all the signatures because there could be some chance that this will get blocked. The authentic data, the authentic packets might get dropped or might get blocked, right? So some organizations do take such decisions, but by default we generally say to our clients that the critical, high critical, and the critical and high categorized signature must be enabled and action should be set to block. The reason is these high and critical signatures are tested across millions of computers, right? Before a OEM, before a vendor creates a signature, right? These signatures are tested across millions of machines, across millions set of data, right? So if after the testing and after the high probability of it, right, then only the signatures are confirmed, right? The signatures are programmed into a devices, fed into our devices. Okay, so there's a highest probability that these are sure shot attacks, right? That's why the critical and high things needs to be enabled, because it went through a lot of examination and the permutations and combinations of evaluation, right? So generally we need to, when you grow as a professional, you just have to take these minimum kind of decisions to minimize the risk and threats target to it, right? So as we discussed in the firewall, there are source, destination, port, and protocol. IPS also have what all things will have. IPS will have signatures and what type of action you need to take, right? You take action to block it. You to take an action to tear down the connectivity, drop it, and etc. etc. Right? That kind of decisions, you can set an IPS to take upon, right? That's the significance of IPS. Now, IPS and IDS are network level devices. I'm sure you might have gone through the layers, right? The ISO layers, right? Network layer it comes from the layer 3. Now, what about the application related attacks, right? You might have seen, there are different ways of there are different types of attacks, right? In the initial slide, I talked about network based attacks and application based attacks, right? Application based attacks are a little different because it works on application layer, right? It deals with the application. Say for example, sorry, if somebody want to say. Okay, so application related attacks are above in terms of the layers and target towards the application itself. Say for example, if you want to deface, right? If you want to deface an application, we generally tend to see, right? People deface the application, write some crap there, right, and leave there, right? So those kind of attacks, if you want to exfiltrate some data, right? You want to dump some data from an application, you want to access the database and dump some data from the application. These are happens on the application layer, right? It's not on the network layer, right? So those kind of things needs to be taken care. It cannot be done through your IPS, right? Nowadays the firewalls are coming works from layer 3 to layer 7. Very advanced firewalls are coming. However, it is always recommended to use a web application firewall, right? This web application firewall will not be considered as a replacement of network firewall. These are standard firewalls, needs to be there to restrict the network related access, deny, those kind of decisions will be taken care by the firewall. But the web application firewall are very sophisticated devices which will exclusively are designed and developed to take care of application related attacks, right? So application related things will be understood, application related attacks will be understood, are these devices, again, as I said, IPS and IDS. The web application firewalls are meant to be protecting the web application related traffic and ensure that the attacks which are targeted towards the web application technologies are mitigated. It works in a similar fashion as I mentioned in IDS or IPS. It again has signatures, right? Web application firewalls will have certain signatures. It looks up to the packet, understands if the signatures are matching. If it is matching, it will blocks it. If it doesn't match, the packet will be further sent back to the destination, right? It is the same way how IPS works, right? You again need to enable the WAF to empower it to take the decision through the signatures enablement, writing the technical policies around it, right? You need to enable the signatures, define an action, what action it needs to take, drop, block, alert, these kind of things you always do. Again, as I said, the WAF by default will not have all the signatures enabled by default. You need to choose, you need to pick and choose which are the signature which you wanted to enable, which are which you need to enable to protect your applications, right? The additional thing what you have to do in WAF is you need to define which are the web applications. Your organization might be having 100 web applications, right? So which are the applications which you want to monitor, that needs to be explicitly defined here. www.karnatakagovernment.com, telanganagovernment.com, say for example, right? So all these things needs to be protected in all these applications are part of my organization. all the traffic coming towards this application needs to be protected sufficiently, right? Those kind of application details and the signatures which you wanted to triggered when a traffic matches with those signature and action, what action you need to take, right? These kind of basic, I'm talking about only basic things. There are a lot of other things we can do through the IDS and IPS, WAF, and there are different different configurations can be done, right? Just to ensure that the necessary uh, actions are taken against a malicious attack, right? Understand these fundamental technology rules, right? These are very important to start with as a fundamental thing, right? There are latest technologies available now. There's an advanced level of WAF. There's a next level of WAF is coming as a RASP, right? The real-time application, this thing, protection, right? That is another solution, but it is still not very prevalent in the industry and market. Right? It eventually grow, but people are still relying on this web application firewall so that their applications are protected well, right? I'm not sure how much time we have, Chika.
Go on till 6:30, Pramod. No issue.
Okay. I thought there's a question and answers for half an hour. That's okay. Okay. Next is, see, we have been talking about this, right? We have been talking about on IPS, we talked about signatures, and on WAF, we talked about signatures, right? So, and we also talked about, these are the solutions which are effectively working, looking at the packet if it matches, the pattern matches with the traffic, with the signatures mentioned in the with the signatures mentioned in these devices, then only it will block, right? But if you look at these sophisticated attacks, right? What happens if, say, for example, what happens? There is a threat which never matches with the signature, right? What happens? A threat which never had a signature itself, right? There's no signature mentioned. It's completely a new threat. I don't know. I don't have a signature with me. I cannot compare with the database I have. Hence, it is not malicious, right? So many attacks are actually happened that way. That the signatures are not matching. These are very latest threat, and are still organizations succumb to certain compromise in their systems. How it was possible? It was possible because there was no signature defined for that, right? So the industry evolved into technology. There's an innovative way of detecting a threats, right? They are very complex. They are very complex attacks. They are very complex threats, right? Combining with the different techniques, their techniques, tactics, and procedures used by the attackers, right? So they crack this way of dealing with the WAF and IPS. They come with an advanced level of threats, advanced level of attacks. Okay, so if there's no signature, then the world look up as helpless situation, right? Hence, they come up with the concept of behavior analysis, right? It's a behavior which decides whether it's a behavior which decides whether the packet is malicious or not, right? If say for example, let's talk about if you go to hospital, right? The doctor checks what, like doctor asks you certain things, right? You Are you having cough? Are you having body pains? Are you getting chilly feelings and things like that? Then possibly, right? Possibly you would be having some malaria, right? You go for these tests, right? So initially they feel initial examinations say that, right? Symptoms look like this, right? You could be a you could be you could be having this disease, right? So these kind of things, the symptoms, right, are looked at. The symptoms and the behavior of a packet is looked at and then decided whether it is malicious or not. Say, for example, you might have heard about ransomware, right? There's a lot of incidents happen on ransomware or a different organization. What they typically do, right? They come, execute something, and encrypt everything and ask for the ransom, right? I have encrypted data, I deleted some data, you give me money, I'll give you the solution to how to decrypt it, right? So what happens is, I I will come to know whether this packet will be able to decrypt, encrypt the data, or will it has some command to delete our data, right? All these kind of operations I'll get to know only when I execute these things, right? I really need to look at this packet by executing it. I went to the signature, it's not matching. Now let me see if after execution, after executing this packet certain data into my local systems, how my system is reacting to it, what is this packet is intent to do it, right? It executed, it is understood that uh, uh, after execution, it behavior is, it is deleting certain files, it is encrypting certain files, right? And it is corrupting certain files, right? I observe these three actions. Okay, this is the behavior of such traffic, such packet, right? This is suspicious. I don't expect any packet to work like this, right? This is out of our expectation uh, when it comes to our application functionality, right? If there is an internet banking system, I generally look at the traffic of users who gets authenticated, comes, do the some transaction and leave that, right? But I see certain things, people are accessing my website and trying to upload something, and the data is getting executed and it's working very weird way, right? So these kind of things needs to be examined through the symptoms, right? Only after the execution of it. Okay, there's no signature, there's nothing you can do about it. You need to execute and see whether it is a good packet or a bad packet, right? These kind of things happens through sandboxing or anti-apt solution, things like that, right? If it is
Sorry to interrupt you, Pramod.
Yashika.
You can start taking question answers as per your convenience. Anytime after 6:15, whether you want to take it after the completion of the presentation or now. We have time till
Oh,
6:30 in totality.
yeah. So I don't know. See, I keep going. I don't know how the audience are able to understand, because even if they understand the firewall and IPS and WAF part of it, right? I'll be very happy that this session was very fruitful. Probably I would like to take the questions from them that that would be good for everybody.
Sure, as per your convenience, Pramod. No issues.
Uh, okay, so are we taking the questions now, Shika, or?
As per your convenience, Pramod. If you think that you need to cover certain topics before taking
I think
questions,
I think I'm in the middle of explaining this. After this, we'll take the questions,
definitely. Sure, sure.
right?
Okay.
So as I mentioned, guys, I need to execute the data. Then only I'll be based on the behavior. We take the necessary action, right? That's what this anti-APT sandboxing kind of solution does. This solution contains a very high powered, very high performing machines, powered with different virtual machines. Must be knowing what is virtual machine is. It is just it's not a physical machine, it's a virtual instance, right? It is nothing but a server, say for example, just imagine that way, right? It works, there are multiple sets of virtual machines are are part of these kind of solutions, where the data, the packets will be executed, and the behavior of it will be looked at. As I said, just an example, I executed data in the virtual instance of my sandbox, and I looked at it, how these are being behaved, right? It is encrypting some data. No, I don't expect these kind of packets to be entered into my application or network. Hence, drop this. I'll not put further back to our applications, right? I don't want to do that, because this is acting very behavior in a very abnormal way. This is not something on normal activity I generally observe, right? So these kind of threat detection, advanced level of threat detection things are happening in the anti-APT or sandboxing, and these kind of things. They examine through the behavior, because not every threat will, I mean, known threat will have signature for sure. Known threat will definitely have a signature for sure. But unknown threats, we don't know at all, right? There are a lot of innovation, there are a lot of other things that are happening with respect to the unknown threats. But we will never get to know, we'll never certainly block everything. Risk cannot be zero, right? Having said all this, can't be risk can be zero, right? So that's the concept of anti-APT. So I pause here. Shika, I'll take the questions if our participant would like to know more about it. But
Sure.
these are very fundamental things. Having said that, all of you, these are very fundamental things, right? There are other configuration items, there are other things you need to know. But before getting into the advanced level, it is very important that you understand the functionality. The premise on which this technology logically works is something really important to understand. That is where I try to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramod. So I see a couple of questions on the chat window. You can take them up.
How do I see? Sorry, maximize. How do I maximize this? Can somebody help me?
It will be open towards your, if you see it will be open towards your right hand side, Pramod. If you want, I can read out the questions for you.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a question by Guru Prasad. He asks, what if malicious packet has intelligence of check, whether it is running in virtual environment or the real one?
It does. Yeah. Very good question, actually. Right. So, even as I say that attackers start learning about IDS and IPS, WAF and all. They also started learning about, right. It gets executed in the virtual environment. It detects it. The malware itself has an intelligence, right, to detect that it is being executed, right? It is not the right destination it has reached. It is being tested and examined, right? For that, again, there are for that also the solutions are built, right? The anti-APT, again, for example, if sandboxing itself will have the additional programs, right? In case if a malware is trying to bypass, in case a malware is trying to is programmed to level where it understands it, right? So those kind of logics are also built into it. It's a very right question, right? People generally see what happens is, when we come to know if there is some remedy, right? I'll try to bypass the remedy. I'll try to enact as such, as if the remedy will not have an impact on me to detect, right, my behavior, right? So yes, that kind of packets are there. That kind of malicious, the malicious executables, the malicious files are sent out to disguise it. Very correct. Yeah.
We have another question. Abhishek asks, do you believe open source IDS, IPS, NSM engines like Suricata can be used instead of Cisco firewalls?
Uh, those are not very effective, honestly. The open source tools are not very effective. But my answer to that, it depends upon what is your organization risk is about, right? If your organization is not very critical, doesn't deal with a very critical infrastructure or data, right? You probably can make use of the open source tool. The only problem with open source tools are if there is a new threat, right? Say, for example, during the COVID, a lot of attacks have happened, right? If there's a new threat, the open source tools will not have that response time, right? Because it's open source, nobody will have an ownership to release, appropriate signatures, appropriate remedy methods to block those attacks, right? That is the fundamental issue with open source. Generally, those are not very effective, and I'll go back to my primary statement that if your organization is a bank or a financial institution or some organization which is dealing with the critical data, it is not suddenly encouraged to use such open source. Go for a commercial solutions. You will get the patches within the SLA times, so that you are secure. Like, at least there's some assurance that there would be a solution for you to combat the threats.
Thanks. There is another question by Jagdish. He's asking, is there any approach to prevent malware attacks other than rule-based methods? If
Mhm.
yes, could you please suggest an approach for the same?
Yeah, the one which I just discussed, Jagdish, that we talked about sandboxing and all because it does not really contain the rules, right? Very advanced solutions coming with artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to detect advanced malwares, right? To detect advanced ransomwares or malwares, right? And other malicious programs, right? So signature based, let us not rely completely on the signature based. We need to look at the behavioral aspects of it, right? For which you need to have a latest technology, in place. The approach would be to have, as I mentioned, you go deeper as much possible to deploy the latest technologies, ensure that your systems are hardened, right? See, let us also look at what are the other possible things which we can do, uh, not only with respect to the solutions which you have discussed. There are other controls, right? There are other controls, which needs to be taken care with respect to your system hardening. Ensure that there's no ports are open, only necessary services runs, right? Restrict the access to within the systems, and there are other things to do it. At least, right? It is said that, right? As I say, risk cannot be zero. You probably cannot detect every threat. If it's a 0 day threat, right, then it is very difficult to control such kind of threats exploiting your environment, right? It is more to do with how quickly you react to it, right? To detect if there is a damage happen, how effectively and quickly you're reacting to it so that the impact is confined, right? The approach, as I say, Jagdish, I'll repeat it. You look at the advanced solutions to detect the malwares, right? And take care of the other necessary action like system hardening, ensure that access restrictions are there, no open-ended rules are there, right? And you react quickly to by detecting these kind of threats. We did not discuss about the detection of threats, security monitoring and all, but yeah, that will help you greatly.
Right. One more question we have on how firewall protects the ports which are open, which can be identified by using NMAP port scanning feature.
Can you come again, please?
How firewall protects the ports which are open.
Firewall. See, firewall will not protect the ports. Okay. Firewall access allows the access to through the ports which are open to, right? Uh, when it comes to protection. Let's not talk about only the ports, right? Let's talk about the overall protection. Okay. It could be a protection against the network. It could be a protection against the network uh, attacks. See, one of the attacks here, I just taken one example, SYN flood, right? Somebody trying to keep pulling you with half open packet, right? You all might be knowing about three-way handshaking, right? The SYNAC and SYNAC again, right? So somebody just trying to only SYN, the flooding with a lot of traffic so that your firewall will get exhausted, right? And it will deny a service. Once it's exhausted and it goes down, it will deny a service. So firewall look at all this traffic, right? The SYN flood and all those kind of attacks can be prevented by the firewall. So it comes with certain basic features where it itself is resilient to the attacks and also protect your network. Yeah. So that kind of mechanisms are built in firewall.
Right. Vipul is asking what's advanced persistent threat? Is it an attack or an environment where we can test an unknown threat for which we don't have signature?
Correct. So see, there are advanced persistent threats, right? We call it as APTs. These are threats, or these are concepts, or these are threats. You call it as, you categorize it as, as it is, right? You can test this by having a very dedicated sandboxing kind of environment, right? There are techniques to the two things. Okay, I'll answer in two parts, right? There are techniques which are to detect the APTs, as we discussed about anti-APT kind of solutions. Okay, which examines the data, which examines the packet and decide if it is, anti-APT. It goes in stages. It won't be a 1 minute job. Actually, it won't be a 1 second or 1 minute job. but it goes in a stages where it classifies an attack as an advanced persistent threats. There is a second way to understand whether is your organization is susceptible to your organization is susceptible to any APT kind of attacks. There are solutions where you can actually test your environment just to understand are you really weakened enough, or your solutions are weaker enough to succumb to such kind of attack, right? There are concepts called breach analysis, breach attack simulations, right? The breach readiness, and the other things where which will actively test your organization comes with a lot of predefined attacks, right? As we talk about predefined signatures, tools available to tools available which comes with the predefined attacks. You just have to launch it and see whether the advanced persistent threats. There are groups, there are APT groups are there, and their tools, their techniques, and the procedures they use are fed into a tool which will examine through your network and say that your network is not very resilient enough to defend against advanced persistent threat. The best way to look at your advanced persistent threat detection is to deploy anti-APT solutions, which will help you in detecting the APT attacks. Where we I just sorry, I may not answer completely. Where we can test unknown threat for which we don't have signature. As I say, that sandboxing kind of environment will be able to help you to test these kind of attacks.
Right. In the next question, Narendra is asking you to suggest any open source RASP tools.
Narendra, I'm not very sure about RASP tools because the concept itself is very much new. The concept is coming up, but I'm not very sure if there are any RASP tools as such. I'm not sure about it. Sorry.
Mr. Ajit Kumar is asking, how do we handle encrypted malware?
Yeah. So just for example, if the malware is encrypted, right, the solutions will it's a very tricky question actually. If you look at banking kind of environment, right, which always works on TLS. Not only the banking in general, nowadays everybody is working on very encrypted channels, and the data, the payload, it also gets encrypted, right? On top of your TLS connectivity, the data is also gets encrypted, right? When the traffic is encrypted, you know, when I was presenting the screen, let me present again. Okay, this is very relative question, so just wanted to show them the importance of having. Let me know once you see the screen.
Yes, it's visible. It's visible.
Right. So I talked about this SSL offloader or packet broker, right? We spoke about all these solutions and this one, right? If I'll stop sharing it. Yeah. So if the packet, as I said, that every application is working on TLS and the payloads, the actual data is getting encrypted, right? All these all these solutions we talked about, PS, WAF, and all, will not be able to look through it because this data is encrypted, right? So it is necessary that we decrypt the things, right? We decrypt the things and pass on the data to all these solutions which are looking into the data and examining it for the suspiciousness. If it is encrypted, no other solution will not be able to, no solution will not be able to understand, uh, actually look at the packet itself, right? It is not possible because it's all crumbled data, it's all encrypted, right? It is not possible to detect the threats unless it is decrypted. If any data is being encrypted, right, it is considered by default. If I am not able to decrypt the data, by default, it is considered to be a suspicious packet. Some solutions will drop that packet there itself because organization which has a capability to decrypt it, right, is unable to decrypt it, then you know those are considered to be a suspicious one. And most of the times, these encrypted malwares are able to disguise, are able to go through the security solutions, right?
Right. In the next question, Amit is asking, how do data centers manage security issues in their day-to-day world?
Amit, can you be a little specific because the question is little open. Data
Uh,
center manage security issues in day-to-day world.
I think we'll wait for Amit to get back on that. We can move to the next question then, Pramod.
Yep.
All right. Ajit is asking, what is the role of SSL offloader broker?
Correct. Just now I mentioned SSL offloader does the offloading of SSL. When SSL, SSL is nothing but your certificate, right? When a digital certificate is binded to our application, ensure that the digital certificates will ensure that the entire traffic, the SSL will ensure that the entire traffic is encrypted, right? Complete channel, the data is completely encrypted from the browser to the destination, from the server, right? The entire channel gets encrypted. As I mentioned, right, if this entire encrypted data is going through the different devices, IPS, WAF, or the other things which we have discussed, right, they'll not be able to look through the data and understand the suspiciousness of it, correct? So what SSL offload does is it offloads, it detach, it decrypts in a simple terms, it decrypts the data and give the data to all these devices which are examining the examining the packets, so that it will have a visibility into this data, and it will further examine and confirm, right? So whether this data is suspicious or not. Without SSL, it is little harder to look at every packet, understand it, and categorize something as a very suspicious packet or not. That's the use of SSL offloader.
Yeah, there's another question on the same topic asking the difference between SSL and TLS.
There's no difference actually. Both are same in nature. Earlier SSL had vulnerabilities. The issues with SSL, or the SSL is no more secure. Hence, it is upgraded to TLS. It's the same thing. Don't get confused.
Right. There's another question by Vidyasagar. How
Mhm.
cookies have affected our privacies or other personal dangers? Are cookies essential for every organization? He's asking.
The cookies are used by the applications, right? It is not essential, but that's how the application work. That's the first answer. How cookies are affected our privacy? Unless if the cookies are collecting any data, right? Cookies used for multiple purposes, right? So if the purpose of the cookie is to collect some data related to your personally identifiable information, PII, it could be your machine name, your username, machine address, and things like that. Then yeah, then there is a privacy issue, right? So that's why when we do a application security testing, we also evaluate things which are cookies, how cookies are being used, what it is used for, right? Is it tracking some data or is it collecting some data and things like that? Generally, it doesn't do it. But yes, some phishing sites and some other sites which are malicious in nature does collect some data from your personal perspective. Yes, these are needs to be the cookies needs to be secured. First thing is the cookies needs to be secured, right? There are other concepts of securing the cookies from the application security standpoint, right? Cookies needs to be restricted to the information which is not supposed to collect. Even if it is collecting, it needs to be stored securely, right? When it says stored securely, nobody cannot steal the data from the cookies from your browser setting, from your browser things.
There's one question asking to share a few network security breaches which have happened due to poor architecture. Examples of network security.
Yeah, there are many examples. Say, for example, Cosmos Bank, for example. Cosmos Bank, the understanding what was given to in the information available in the public domain that their firewalls were not restricted, were not designed in a restricted way that allowed some outsider to take the connectivity into their network, right? So the firewall allowed it. They further did not had good controls with respect to the passwords and all, right? I'm sure you might have all heard about this Cosmos Bank Heist attack, right? Just taking that example as an example, right? So the architecture was not very good enough, right? and the access controls were not put in place from the internet perspective on the perimeter firewall. Prima facie, that was from one reason which allowed an attacker to come inside. Yeah.
Right. Rakesh is asking, how do we protect DOS attacks coming from frequently changing IPs? And how do we filter it if it's coming from random IPs?
Yeah. So there are two things, Rakesh. One is, if your uh, IP is spoofed, right? That means you appear to be 1234, but inside you are something else, right? I can scoop and do a masquerading, right? The firewalls are actually having this kind of intelligence. They actually look at the headers, they do some header analysis and look at the actual stuff and decide, right, whether this IP is spoofed or not. If somebody appear to be something else, but actually their headers speak something else, right? The firewalls, as I said, right, firewall is not only about the access controls, but it comes with several other security inbuilt mechanisms, right? Uh, so IP spoofing can be detected in multiple layers on routers, on switches, on firewalls, right? That's one thing. So every time when an IP is getting changed, right, that is where that is where your DDoS kind of solutions, the IPs are changing with respect to one destination, right? We can, there are multiple ways of handling it actually, right? We can define a threshold to application layer that if I receive 1,000 connection on the similar nature from a 1,000 IPs in a 1 second, then I'll block it, right? Those kind of attack surface techniques are there, but it is not generally used because it is hard to detect the genuineness of different IPs connecting to it. It could be a legitimate traffic, it could be illegitimate also, right? So these kind of attacks are very very not easy to detect if the IPs are keep changing, and the fragments of data is coming from different IPs, right? But these all put together, these all will be stitched together. And you remember I mentioned about an advanced persistent threat, right? It is not 1 minute job. 1 minute job, it could be possible. Some things can be straight away say that, okay, this is an attack. If not, I also mentioned about the into the machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence, right? All these techniques are coming up to detect these prolonged attacks initiated from different IPs, right? So these mechanisms also built in, but the accuracy of that, IPs keep changing, and detecting those kind of attacks is not very prevalent yet, right? So, by the way, as we speak about artificial intelligence based attack detection, right? The artificial intelligence based attacks are also happening, right, through the automated programmed robotics and all, right? That is a situation. This is a perfect example where we can describe the IPs keep changing their, their location, their IP segments, and things like that. Right? It is from the multi-placed and multi-thread vector attacks are happening with the different IPs. Yeah.
There's another question asking about the difference between penetration testing, red teaming, and blue teaming.
Okay. Shika, can we consider this is the last question because I.
Sure. As a matter of fact, if you're able to see the chat, you may choose the last two questions which you feel are most relevant to the session, and we can end it after that.
Fair. Where does the essence? Okay. What was the first question you asked, Shika?
Hello.
Difference between
Penetration test.
penetration testing, red teaming, and blue teaming.
Correct. So,
మొత్తం 3 డాక్యుమెంట్స్ ఉన్నాయండి.
Requesting the
yeah. So penetration
right.
testing, every activity we have are these are three different activities, right? But they complement each other. The objective of these three activities are different. Penetration testing is more to do with the objective of penetration testing is more to do with identifying a vulnerability and exploiting it, right? I identified there is a vulnerability, there is a weakness in the system. I exploit it and I'll see what is the impact of it, right? that is a basic, the basic object is that I exploit what is vulnerable there and see if I able to exploit or anything, or I exploit it, and what is the impact of it. The impact could be stealing the data. The impact could be shutting down some machine. Impact could be defacing an application, or etc. etc. Impact could be a executing a script, right? Red teaming, you do the same thing, right? Red teaming is also you do the same thing, but the objective is to cause a breach, right? You wanted to do some damage, you want to cause a breach and show to the organization that this is how a breach could happen. Penetration the team does the same thing, okay? But say for example, if I'm able to move from one machine to another machine, right? That is penetration testing, right? But if I able to move from one machine to another machine, from there to my core banking system, from there to ATM, and do over the period of time, that is red teaming, right? So generally, red teaming is performed without any knowledge given to organizations, right? We don't give any intimation or any kind of planned activity. It's not a planned activity. I can use multiple ways of doing a red teaming activity. Starts from sending a phishing email, taking your credentials, right? Doing a social engineering, right? But doing a physical entry, right? I disguise your security guard and get into a data center, right? So that is the major objective, right? It's more of complementing activities, penetration testing and red teaming. Red teaming fundamentally differs from the penetration testing, is that it is not a informed activity. Nobody knows in the organization, right? The multiple ways of doing this activity to achieve the objective, which is causing a breach. That is your red teaming. The blue teaming is, right? Say for example, I'm doing a red teaming or I'm doing a penetration testing. How organization is reacting to it, right? As I talk about, we have not discussed about that, security incident monitoring and threat detection and response of it, right? But how organization is responding to it, right? I detect a threat. What am I going to do with that, right? That is what a blue teaming does, right? It looks at how actively I am monitoring and detecting the threats, right? Say, for example, if there's a breach happened, how actively I'm detecting that breach and how am I responding to it? Okay, that is what a blue teaming does.
Right. Pramod, are you ready to take another question, or should we wrap it here?
I would like to wrap it here because on 7:45, 6:45, I'm sorry, I have another meeting scheduled.